Hey everyone, Casella here. Before we get going, 3 quick things. First, I swear to you that this is not going to be one of those podcasts where the host provides meta-commentary about audio foibles, but on this episode, our guest had a spring or something on their desk chair that sounds oddly like a droid from Star Wars at times. That is not a cute thing I was trying to do. Number 2, if you're listening to this before March 14th and you are nominating for the Hugo Awards, a reminder that A Meal of Thorns is eligible for Best Fancast. And finally, as always, if you like what we're doing on the podcast and at the Ancillary Review of Books, we'd appreciate your support. Chipping in on Patreon would be great, but just leaving us a rating or review or otherwise spreading the word about us would be very cool of you. Okay, on to the show. A critic is a creature who has views quite like a camel's, flowers and fruit he scorns. In the flower garden of the honeyed muse, he starves unless he finds a meal of thorns. Welcome to A Meal of Thorns, a critical book club from the Ancillary Review of Books. I'm Jake Brookins. We look at selections from speculative fiction, mostly, and we ask writers, critics, and reviews editors of Hugo-winning magazines to tell us, what's the deal with this thing? What's going on with all this speculation? Today, we are talking about Timothy Zahn's novel, Heir to the Empire. Joining me once more is Dan Hartland, a critic and editor whose writing has been published in Foundation, the LARB, Vector, a little place called the Ancillary Review of Books, and of course at Strange Horizons, where he is also a reviews editor. Dan, welcome back. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm great for being back, Casella. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, it's good. How are you?
I am doing okay. I'm feeling good today. A lot of ups and downs living in this time period of feeling like everything is in a sort of fascist collapse. It's not super great. I want to share, this might be too bleak right off the cuff, but
let's go.
Yeah. Yesterday, my sister's out of town, so I was feeding her cats, and I had to drive. It's like 0 degrees in Buffalo, Fahrenheit, which is, what is that, like negative teens Celsius?
It's cold.
Like
it's cold.
We have a nice thick layer of like squishy, it hasn't melted snow, but it's still like been sort of ground dry, into like this horrible cinder slush dirt mix that's everywhere, which is very nice. And I was sitting there thinking like, boy, if I were in a civilized country, we would have trains, And then I had the super depressing thought, I probably just won't live to see a robust rail network in America. Like they might be started, but they take a long time, Even assuming they eventually start them. Like I'll be pretty old by that point. But then I had the thought, and this is the hopefully spin around thought, that, when we say things are not sustainable, that's real. That means they're not sustainable. That means they won't be around forever. Whatever is happening in the world in 200 years, people won't be driving huge, hideous SUVs. That just won't be happening in 200 years. Like no matter what, it's not sustainable. So I was trying to take some solace in that.
I like that. I like you've got to find your hope on the level where you can find it, right?
Yeah.
And if there's no more, I don't know, SUVs in 200 years, there's the hope. I like it. I mean, I'm from a country where we, in theory, have trains and we have rail, but we struggle very much to build new stuff, and the old stuff is limited. So, I mean, I do not speak from public transport utopia either. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
But back to speculation. What have you been reading? Anything good?
Yeah, so I've been reading Bhatia's The Sentence, which I've enjoyed. So that should be... I'm reviewing that for Foundation, actually. So I have some thoughts on that. And I've also been reading Water Black by Alex Phoebe, which is the sort of final Cities of the West novel, Mordu and Malachi before it, which, yeah, I mean, that series, do you know it?
Yeah, I read the first one, and I don't know how to say it. I didn't feel like I wanted to read more. I was impressed without liking it, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense, because I'm reading it to try and figure out how I feel about it, because it's not a text that, I don't think it wants you to kind of warm to it. It doesn't want you to like it. It's not one of, if it was in a room full of books, it wouldn't be one of the ones walking towards you with a smile on its face and its hand outstretched, right? Like, but yeah, and they're funny books. They're funny, but I mean, I think you were right not to proceed to the volume 2, because like, if you didn't like volume 1, like volume 2 is strange, like because it barely progresses the plot and yet it's as big as the first one. And then this third one, yeah, I mean, I'll let you know. I'll let you know.
Nice.
Yeah.
I know a couple critics who I really dug it and thought it was a good wrapping up of the thing it's doing. So, I'm like 20 pages into Christina Rivera Garza's The Taiga Syndrome.
Ah, yeah.
And I'm screaming. It's one of those books where I picked it up and like as soon as I like read the first sentence, I was like, oh, I'm in. So I'm really loving that. She's got a novel coming out here next month that I kind of had my eye on and hadn't read anything by her, so I'm going to try to circle back and read some things. And yeah, I don't know if you've read it, but it's this detective-esque novel.
Right.
It's on the sentence level, it's not much like him, but like I immediately got kind of Paul Auster vibes. That like you've taken this very well worn, very well investigated, genre tropes and like just extracted something from it. The vibes are intense. It's really good.
Well, it's interesting because, again, a completely different book, again, I think, but The Sentence, which I mentioned, I've just read, it does something very similar for the legal thriller, but kind of also fuses it with, kind of a science fantasy world, I sort of want to say. So, yeah, it's really interesting when a book does that. Yeah, great.
Yeah, and I also just want to call out, because I don't know if I'll get another chance to discuss it on the pod, but I am working on a review of The Tomb of Dragons, the Addison, the new entry in the Goblin Emperor Cemeteries of Amalo series. It's really interesting. I'm really fascinated by it. All of those books, particularly, I think the Cemeteries trilogy, I think, is actually a lot stronger than the Goblin Emperor. And they are like pulling a lot on some like established mystery, cozy-ish detective kind of things. And I both really, really, really like all of them. Also, every single one of them has kind of like rubbed me weird in a bunch of ways, kind of politically, and what it's doing. Do you remember that? Who was it? Elizabeth Sandifer, the hug.
Oh yeah, sure.
Hug boxing versus scab picking, that thing where it's like, do you imagine is your fantasy world free of oppression, and that's why you're there, or is it like a way to investigate your oppression? And the Cemeteries of Amalo books very much feel like they're trying to do both and trying to do neither at the same time. I'm trying to wrap my head around
it sort of feels like you're reading those books in the same way that I'm reading the Phoebe books in a way. Like I'm trying to... Yeah, there are things that I'm not sure are working, but like you really need to dig in to figure out whether that's right or whether it's you kind of bouncing off for some other reason.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so reading that. That's really good. But let's jump back in time. Let's not talk about what's coming out right now. Today we're talking about Timothy Zahn's Star Wars tie-in novel, The Heir to the Empire. This was originally published by Bantam in 1991. And if you're keeping track, The Return of the Jedi came out in 83. Is that right? Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Yep. And so this book was quickly followed by two more in the trilogy. It is set 5 years after the events of the last film at that time. The novel follows the main cast of the film as they encounter new challenges and threats, including a new Imperial antagonist, Grand Admiral Thrawn. Zahn's trilogy helped launch a huge world of expanded universe Star Wars material, and although it was later declared non-canon by corporate decisions we might get into a little bit, many of its ideas and characters continue to influence the franchise. Dan, tell me about your relationship with this book, because we had been talking sort of like when we knew we were going to do an episode, and we've been talking about some like super serious, let's get depressed, let's maybe get canceled books. And then you pitched tie-ins and mentioned this as one, and I was like, oh yeah, let's do it. So what was your relation to this book?
So how can you talk about your relationship with this particular book without, it's inextricable from your relationship with the Star Wars property more widely, right? But I mean, to try and talk about this book and this kind of trilogy, because really they're not standalone. Like you have to read all three. We don't have to, but
I had forgotten how not standalone they were until I read this one. Yeah,
I mean the texts are designed to make you read all three, even if you decide not to. But I think, from memory, so this was a period where I was reading a lot of tie-ins. So I didn't read the book when it first came out. I would have been a little bit too young. So we're talking kind of, I don't know, like some years after it came out, but I think before Phantom Menace. I think that's where we're here. And I was reading quite a few times. I was reading a lot of TNG novelizations as well at the time. I think I pitched one of those as well to you, actually. I think I discovered this one because actually I was bought as a gift something called, I think it was called The Guide to the Star Wars Universe.
Oh, okay.
And it was this brown book with a TIE Defender or something on the front. And as I was flicking through it, like, it kept referring to this trilogy of books that I didn't know about, because I'd grown up just on the original trilogy. My favorite film was Return of the Jedi. We can talk about why if you want. And I didn't know anything about all these kind of books. So I was like, well, I've got to read those. And I remember inhaling them, like just eating them up. Because I was totally unaware that Lucasfilm had already said, well, these are the sequels, but also they're not necessarily what George would have written. So, you know, like, they're a version of what might happen. I didn't know that. I thought this was what happened after the films, and I wanted to know what happened after the films. And I remember being really struck by Thrawn. I thought, you know, like everyone else, what a great idea, because he was so different to the villains of the films. And that was my relationship. I mean, I'd come from it. I had loads of action figures in boxes somewhere, and I was reading it as, like a film, because the films hadn't been made.
Right.
And loved it. Loved that experience at whatever age that was. Young enough not to know it better, I guess. But to actually enjoy the books.
Yeah. This book has a one very particular spot in my personal reading history, which is that this is the first book that I physically bought.
Oh, wow. That is big.
Yeah. Which was, it must not have been right when it first came out, but it was probably pretty close. I think it was maybe like within a few years of it coming out. And I was, I don't know, 10 or 12 or something. And we were on a long road trip with my family, and I saw it in like a spinner rack in a drugstore. And I had run out of the books I had packed for the car, and I was like, there are Star Wars books.
Right.
I didn't know there were Star Wars books. And with my like hard-earned, carefully hoarded, you know, like $5.99 US at the time, which is what a mass market cost, I bought it and devoured it. Went on to read them all. Like, yeah.
That's so interesting, because genuinely, I didn't mention it because I thought it was a very dull thing to say, but since you've shared it, I'll say one of my core memories of these books is the act of buying them. So going to the kind of the store, which here was a W.H. Smith's, which is a sort of it's a bookstore, but also it's a stationery store.
Okay.
And it's very focused on mass market paperbacks. Going to the store, finding it on the shelf, buying it. You know, I can close my eyes and I remember the shape of the W.H. Smith's where I bought the book. Interesting that we both have that same connection.
And then it became this, you know, I've talked about this a lot in other contexts, but the experience of being a reader before the internet, I don't want to get all like elder millennial for people that are bored by that. But like, you know, a lot of it was, how do you figure out what to read next? Yeah. Especially when you're a voracious reader. You know, I didn't have a bookstore in my town. So like, if I was going to request something from the library, or if we were going to make a trek to like a bigger place where there was a chain bookstore, like I wanted to kind of know what to find. And so having a way into this very rapidly expanding world of tie-in novels was huge. And yeah, I should have gone down like the list and checked how many I actually read, but it can't be less than like 60. I mean, it's got to be like, there's just tons of them. And I'm looking at titles. I'm like, oh yeah, I read those. And it's funny. It wasn't the books that, it was the prequels that kicked me out. So I had such a bad experience with the prequels. And it was also like, you know, those were coming out when I was in my early 20s and getting rebellious and casting off childish things, you know, so that was kind of a good period to make a break. But
I totally get that, because like the prequels, when they came out, were materially different in tone and content to the Bantam books, which you're right, Zahn sets the template for, and partly he sets the template by fitting into the template he was given. So he was given the role-playing game source books and said, kind of try and be like that. And they apparently they were offered or considered a number of different authors, and they went with Zahn. And he was a kind of Hugo Award-winning guy, but he wrote a particular type of SF, which was quite popular at the time. We can talk about, you know, people like David Brin and all that stuff. And I could see how if you'd read 60 of these Bannon books, and you were used to that sort of, because there's some Mil SF in here, which the films aren't Mil SF. Okay, they've got ships and they've got lasers and they've got stormtroopers, but they're not Mil SF. This is very much, he looked at the scanner screen and noticed the red dots of the TIE fighter. And the prequels are not that. They're Jar Jar Binks, and they're, silly and also mythological and much more invested in the idea of Darth Vader than these books. I mean, Darth Vader's just called a fool in this book. And Sith wasn't a thing. They call them Dark Jedi. So it must have been, if you were invested in this, it's a very different Star Wars universe to what the prequels decided, in fact, was the canon. Yeah.
And I mean, not to give myself too much credit or lean too far into the own elitism that I'm cultivating now.
No, let's do it. Come on.
Yeah, I think seeing the prequels in the theater, I went to the midnight showing. I remember very specifically, and these were a major point of connection with me and my dad. And by the time the prequels came out, I wasn't living at home anymore, so it was this thing that I would go and see him. And walking out of the theater, particularly for the last one, but I remembered a little bit for all of them, and just being I think that was bad. And while at the same time my dad and everyone else I went with was just enthusing about how great that was, because it had all the stuff they wanted to see, and then kind of sitting with that discomfort, and then also thinking many of the other ones aren't that great either, and not the films, but thinking about the surrounding stuff, because it just kind of broke the spell a little bit. And a topic of this podcast that I would like to touch in on whenever I get the chance is the idea of suspension of disbelief and how that works. And this novel in particular, and this trilogy, is really interesting. As you point out, they really don't stand alone. They're not really designed to, but they are also. It's not just that they don't stand alone, which is one thing. They are also designed to buttress and to hold other things up. They are going out of their way, right? These are coming out at a time when the Star Wars star has sunk a bit, right? The film's been out, there has been major stuff for a while, and it's trying to remind you, hey, remember what it was like? You remember this? Look, it's Luke Skywalker. Hey, look, it's Leia. Look, it's Han. I mean, if they could have found a way that, those greeting cards that play music when you open them, if they could have done the John Williams soundtrack in this, right, they would have, right? If they could have had a way that you turn a page and the Wilhelm scream goes off, they would have done it,
Yeah, I mean, it is so interesting because because it's impossible, we're talking about the prequels, it's also impossible to think about these books and not think about the sequels. It's because the sequels replaced in continuity these books. The sequels, these books represent an alternative sequel trilogy, and they are so different. They make some really significantly different choices, and part of that is, of course, the actors had aged out by the time the sequels come around to production. But it's also narrative. So you're absolutely right. These books are not worried about, oh yeah, we're going to focus on the same set of characters. We're not going to try and create new ones. It's the same set of characters that you remember, plus some other ones. And we're going to go back to Dagobah. By page 119, we're back at Dagobah, right?
Go back to the Mos Eisley Cantina.
We're going to go back there. Yeah, we're going to have Han in the Mos Eisley Cantina. We're going to have Wedge Antilles in his X-Wing saying, lock X-Force in attack position. We're going to do all that stuff. Lando, we're going to go back to see Lando, and he's going to basically be on Cloud City, but it's going to be slightly different. There is... The sequel, The Force Awakens was attacked at the time for being just a remake of A New Hope. But I mean, these books do the same thing. And it gets, as I was reading this, I was thinking, hang on, because I mentioned my favorite film was Return of the Jedi, and part of that was because it was the only one that I had recorded off the TV onto VHS, right? So I just watched it again and again and again. But one of the great things about it, from a kid perspective, is it begins kind of in media res.
Right.
It's this film that seems to have a much larger world around it. But as I read this book and thought about the prequels and the sequels and the what do they call it? The Legends continuity now that this has all become. Has Star Wars always actually been really narrow? Because you see, despite these books making different choices, they wind up in the same spots.
I was thinking a lot about, so the episode just before this, we were talking about the Tolkien expanded universe. with some disdain. And which I'm not trying to talk about the Star Wars expanded universe with disdain here, because I kind of think that's what Star Wars is. Like you can talk about the films, you can talk about the original trilogy or all 9 or whatever is like the main thing, but I think it really is the bigger thing, right? It was designed that way. Like maybe not the first one, right? Maybe not A New Hope, but like once Lucas saw this thing's kicking, like it's this whole giant multimedia franchise is kind of what it is. Just that idea of like lore and world building. It's really interesting here because, how to say this? Something I was really noticing here is the sort of paradoxical way that the desire for this more complete, quote unquote, expanded universe or this filled in kind of wiki entried world building winds up making it feel a lot shallower and thinner than it could be.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of how many novels. I mean, there are probably literally 100 novels on my shelf that are this length, right? That I quite like, that all feel more cohesive and they feel like they're sort of more evocative. And like the films, and again, let's just restrict it to kind of talking about the original 3, like they, like all films, science fiction, fantasy or not, they are evoking that just by like, you have the feel of being there. You don't have to like have all the details about how everything works. And here, they're caught in this sort of midway space of, we want to fill it all in. We want to color in everything for you so you know how it all works. But A, they haven't done that. B, you probably can't really do that. And the cracks are kind of showing. And I kept thinking here, like, there's no map here, which is right, maps are a symptom of nerd clomping world building, but they also are a way to back up a sense of reality here. And I'm like, where are things? Where are people coming from? Where are they going? How long does it take? Does the Empire have a government? Do they have mechanics? Where do they go? Why does the New Republic not go after them? And it's this weird mix of, I don't know, a feast and a famine at the same time in terms of details.
Yeah. And some of this, I think, in particular, in these 3 books, some of this is, I think, due to the fact that Zahn is trying to write what he would ordinarily write. So this kind of quite gritty, I mean, I would also say quite dull, but I mean, that's a subjective judgment. 80s style kind of space opera, you know, but in the Star Wars universe. So you get I mentioned the villain is very different. And when you're a kid reading this and you were used to Darth Vader, it's quite exciting to have Sherlock Holmes as the villain, because he has this, you know, Thrawn, for those who don't know, and you know, I can't imagine anyone doesn't now, because he's
people that do, yeah.
I'm sure he's graduated into the actual world. You know, he's been in a TV show now, but he's this Grand Admiral who was away in the unknown regions during the events of the movies. So he comes back and he takes over the fleet because he's brilliant. And the reason he's brilliant is because he can deduce things from a species' art. He can look at a species' art and say, aha, this is how they will behave in battle, which, you know, let's not inspect that too much. And then he can also deduce things from behavior patterns. So there's a great section, or there's a, you know, a kind of not a great section, but there's a key scene where he deduces that Luke Skywalker's on a particular ship from the way that the ship behaves. So he's Sherlock Holmes. He's not like Darth Vader, and this is quite exciting, particularly for someone like me who also likes Sherlock Holmes. But he's not a space wizard. And Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
Star Wars is, like, you're absolutely right. It doesn't have governments. It doesn't have societies. It doesn't make sense. And that doesn't matter when you're following space wizards. But when the novel is really trying to make you believe in some level of granularity, so you don't just get Thrawn, you get like the, again, it's not really well depicted or described, but there seems to be some sort of council that is running the New Republic, which is the sort of rebellion made into a respectable political entity. And they kind of have really basic internecine disagreements. So it's trying to... There's a quote somewhere about turning a military-oriented rebellion into a civilian-based government. What a great idea! That would have been such an interesting story. But there's something about partly the world, but I think also about the fact that these books are desperately trying to just be 3 new movies. Yeah. So that prevents it from going deep, because Star Wars movies don't do that. For example, this book really works very hard to introduce you to this idea that Thrawn is a fantastic villain. You should be really scared of him because he's actually really good at what he does. But the novel ends with a limited victory on the part of the good guys, the New Republic, Luke and Leia and Han. That feels strange because the book's designed to make you fear Thrawn. Why does it do that? Well, it does that because that's how A New Hope ends. And the second volume in this trilogy ends with a defeat for the rebellion, because that's how Empire Strikes Back ends. And then the third book ends. I'm sorry for spoiling all these guys, but the third book ends and Thrawn gets killed and everything's fine because that's how Return of the Jedi ends. And it's just trapped a little bit.
Climactic lightsaber duel and a big installation that then explodes.
That's right. All of that. And it's just trapped a little bit, even though Zahn and Thrawn and the plot seem to be trying to do something different. It can't.
I do kind of love at a really childish level that, the character who is, instead of being really brawny, he thinks, and that's his brawn. What should I...
How do you like that?
Yeah, I do love the Sherlock thing. And I picture like the way that the political coding of the Star Wars films is something that fascinates me. It is not coherent, but it is potent, right? And it's like the Star Wars films are both the American independence and their World War II in the way a lot of they're coded. With like splashes of Vietnam here and there. And like all three of those things are doing very different things in the films. And one of the ways that Lucas has decided to resolve it is just that, British people are generally villainous and sort of posh. And so Thrawn is just so like, if you could have got Jeremy Brett, if you could have got Basil Rathbone, right? Like they're like these like characters that are just perfect for him. And they've played Sherlock.
Exactly. And I think you're right. Lucas has, in more recent years just been open about he thought of in the original three movies, the rebellion he thought was the Viet Cong. But you're right that like the films are never really that radical because they've got all this other imagery and all this other stuff going on, and ultimately it all kind of just sort of just sort of falls apart a little bit. But on the other hand, I kind of still want to pause and say, these books could have failed. So they did something right. I think only Bantam were interested. Like Lucasfilm was shopping around saying, "Do you want to do some Star Wars books?" And the publishers were like, "Well, that ended in 1983. Right. Like that's gone.
Do you want a RoboCop novel? Like what else do you want?"
Right? Yeah. And do some Three Stooges books. Like what are you talking about? So, but Bantam said, "Yeah, let's give this a go." And heck, this sold 15 million copies.
I know, right?
Like, so I kind of don't want to say, because something about how the book is coded and structured works.
How this book works and question mark if this book works, and they're kind of like the same question for me. I can't decide. This was interesting for me as a reread. So on the one hand, this is a little bit of an example of like the Suck Fairy, right? And like this, I remember this being the awesomest thing ever. I knew, like coming back to it, I was like, okay, that was probably not, that had rose tinted glasses on it. But I was kind of surprised to come back to it because I'm in this book club with my wife and a couple friends where our loose theme is just books that were important to us at some point. So we've done a lot of like going back and reading older stuff. And like we just did The Call of the Wild, which was super important to me when I was growing up. And like come back to that, I was like, wow, this slaps. This is, like ideology is pretty weird. Didn't remember all these weird eugenicist threads, but like the writing, the sentence level stuff, I was just like, wow, this was good job, young Casella, remembering this. And this one, less impressive on that level. But I was thinking about the way that on the one hand, I was just reading it, I was kind of like writing arg a little bit here and there, and like the number of just put in a soundbite, put in a phrase that someone said from the film to kind of jog your memory feels weak. A lot of stuff.
So much of that. Like so many. Like let's pause and remember a scene that you know from the movie. Like so many. Like just odd. And yet. And I know I'm interrupting your flow. I'm sorry, Casella. Every single Star Wars property since this time has done that. So we can't, I think, blame Zahn for it. Maybe we can, but it's something else. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, but so that was one side of it, and like I had this laundry list of complaints about this that we'll probably talk about. But I was also thinking about the way that, nonetheless, I burned through this. Usually, like I pretty frequently read books I don't like today, right? Like I'm looking at a lot of stuff that's coming out. I want to kind of stay on top of what's coming out. I want to try to review a diverse range of voices. I read a lot of debut authors where I've never read anything else by them. Read lots of great stuff, but a side effect of that reading strategy is, especially if you're reading stuff that hasn't come out yet, so you don't have other people's opinions, I read a fair amount of books that I don't like. And they're usually a struggle. This book was not a struggle. Like, even like with everything about it that I'm like complaining about, I'm like, something about this is still like cooking. It's still like really easy to keep going. I don't know, that's interesting. I was trying to track it on like a prose level. It's really strange. It's such a simple, it's almost like a young reader. I don't even want to say YA-ish, but not in a way that jumps out at you and like it doesn't, you don't think like, oh, this is for little tiny kids. But then after I started like looking at the beats of how the sentences work, I'm like, how have I gone through this so much? And connected to that kind of like thinness idea, it's kind of shocking how little this book does in its page count. You know, if you look at just what actually happens, it's strangely thin. I'm like, how is it? But it also doesn't have like elaborate descriptions of stuff. It's not like getting like, it's not losing itself in like elevated prose talking about a landscape or something.
It
right?
is definitely not doing that.
It's not doing that.
Yeah.
So I'm like, how is this 400 pages?
Some of it is that it is very, it's kind of leaden, right?
Yeah.
But, I don't want to, I didn't want to use that word because like, I'm not saying it in a, I mean, maybe I am, but I don't mean to say it's bad. What I mean to say is, you know, if a character picks up their lightsaber, like, we don't read Luke grabbed his lightsaber. We read Luke reached for his belt, and at his hip he found the lightsaber, and then he did a snap hiss, and it is so one of the things it does with its page count is it just kind of lingers too much on strange details that don't do anything, that don't add anything. You know, there are often characters and we know how they walk from one side of the room to the next and that they pick something up halfway. There's a lot of detail that I think a creative writing course would tell you to cut.
Yeah, I was thinking of that. Did you read that somewhat divisive Brandon Taylor?
I did. Of course I did.
For listeners who haven't read this yet, you should read it. And pretty much everything Brandon Taylor writes, even though a lot of it's divisive, but it's always thought-provoking and good. But about filmic style, right? Which is what we're talking about here.
Exactly.
And of course you think of the Garth Marenghi, the novelization style, right? Like right as though the film has already been made. And that's a lot of what this book is, right? Is this would be so astonishingly easy to film, right? Like just to turn this into a screenplay would take nothing.
Yeah. I mean, and the some of it is, I think, that like the films were so famous, and this has maybe been lost a little bit, but maybe not in the ones that came since, for being kind of lived in. That the whole idea of Star Wars universe was that it was lived in. And I feel like obviously Lucas had all kinds of visual ways of showing us that and did very well at it. And here, I feel like Zahn's thinking, well, I've still got to get that lived-in thing, so maybe I'll just describe. The freighter had lots of blaster marks on it. And like, yeah, but this is I found this really interesting. So at one point, Luke Skywalker and another character called Mara Jade, who's another one of the characters that appears in these books and then became very popular, right? Let's leave it at that.
No, I have to call out the continuing effort to heterosexualize noted icon Luke Skywalker. We all saw your black Chanel boots, Mr. Skywalker. We got your back.
And they're going through a forest, right? It doesn't matter why. They're going through a forest, and they've got R2 with them. What happens is that, and this is a sentence from this book, one of the trapezoidal sections at the top of his upper dome, indistinguishable from all the other segments, slid open to reveal a long, deep storage compartment beneath it. We don't need that. Like, we've seen R2-D2 open up. Like, we understand how that works, Tim. Like, but there's something very, I want to say granular, but it's not as interesting. There's no grain there.
Yeah, that is interesting. I was laughing reading this. So one of Thrawn's plots involves stealing those little miner ships that he uses to...
the mole miners.
The mole miners that he uses to crack into the other ships and steal them. The first time they're kind of described what these mole miner ships look like, that exact phrase pops up every time we see them later, even when people don't know what they are, and it's truncated cones, right? So like someone's like, hey, I could have sworn for a second there I saw a truncated cone flying by. And like you, the reader, are like, especially if you're 8, are like, aha, I have deduced that this is Thrawn's mastermind, and I am smarter than the characters in here. And like, you're right. So like, in that sense, it works. But on the other hand, having a character say, I could have sworn I just saw a truncated cone fly by.
So this is the other thing about the book, and we're supposed to be trying to figure out what it does well, and I just feel like we're getting distracted by all the things it doesn't. Yeah. But like the characters, the dialogue, right? None of these so these are meant to be direct sequels to beloved films, right? The characters are on the front cover. The first chapter is about Thrawn. The second chapter is the first chapter that we don't get like the new characters in. The first word of that second chapter is Luke. So the characters from the movies are front and center here, but they don't sound like the characters from the movies. Like Luke doesn't sound like Luke. Han definitely doesn't sound like Han. They all kind of react to things in similar ways. They all think through things in a similar way, and that's another part of what Zahn does. Like we get very rationalized internal monologues. So they think, this thing has happened. I could react in this way and that would work, so I might do that. We get a lot of that too. But we don't get a sense of, well, Han reacted like that because he's Han and Luke would react. They all kind of just sort of move through the plot.
Yeah, sort of like a baseline competent MIL-SF kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like, so that in that sense, Han and Lando and Wedge saying, hey, there's a trapezoidal, a truncated cone or a trapezoidal section of R2-D2's upper dome. Like, you kind of get used to it because they all say it. They all say that stuff. But I do think also that you're right, that is one of the ways that the book holds your hand and takes you through. That there are sort of, whether they are quotes from the film, so characters say that they have bad feelings about things, or whether they are, as you say, like the truncated cones, key little bits that Zahn uses to say, hey, this is a thing that you need to pay attention to.
The little detail that the evil clones have an extra vowel in their name.
Yes.
And I'm like, are they hearing this? Is this pronounced? How are they knowing that it's Joros and Luke?
Well, yeah, there is a genuine moment, I think, early on in the novel where sort of Thrawn's kind of sidekick, Watson character, basically, Captain Pelion, whatever it is, says, well, I mean, like, this is Jedi Master Joruus C'baoth, right? Or however you're meant to say it. And Thrawn says, aha, no. You may have noticed the subtle pronunciation difference. It's Joruus C'baoth. And what this introduces is that there are clones in this world.
Right.
And this is one of the biggest ways that these novels are completely separate to the what's now canon. Like their vision of the Clone Wars is very different.
Right.
And very MIL-SF.
So the idea of like the characters and distinguishing, it's like an ongoing bugbear for me, like in my life, is like how we think about characters in fiction and in real life. Because I think how we think about and talk about characterization and character work in fiction is just a sort of like narrow, specialized slice, basically, of what our theory of mind is, how we think human identities exist or not, and how would we represent them, fictional or otherwise. And I was thinking in this, which I'm skeptical of that whole project, but I was thinking in this about how being a tie-in has this accidental effect of sort of hamstringing that whole project. Because when you watch film or theater, when you see a human, who's portraying a fictional character, so much of them that is not fictional is what's informing your ability to, in your mind, create a character, right? So like Luke Skywalker, as written, and let's just talk about just the first film, right? In A New Hope, right? There is no character there. Zero character there. There's nothing, right? A shadow of a ghost, right? Like, but when you get this particular actor at this particular time with this little like catch in his voice, you know, and the way he moves and what he's bringing. He's not like, I'm not saying that like young Mark Hamill was the greatest character ever, but like it's great casting, right? It works really well. He brings that to life. And that's then what the Luke in our mind is like 2% this fictional character, Luke Skywalker, and like 98%, right, what this actor has brought to it. And I think there's probably something to like how star power and celebrity kind of work in a larger way, in that like we do have a sense that actors exist outside of it, right? And that they are real and sort of persistent, and we know they're people, and we know they have relationships and lives and all that stuff. And so that is sort of like ported into the fiction for us in this sort of like hazy way, sort of has like this penumbra of a real person around it. Because that exists for the films, that can't be recreated here. And he also doesn't want to try, because he doesn't want to undercut Zahn, doesn't want to undercut the character as it exists, right? So it's sort of like it makes you hesitant to really dig into that character, because you're going to wind up doing something different no matter what, because a written character is different than a filmed character. And it just, winds up with this odd, even though things are so detailed, you just get like these barely even caricatures, right?
Yeah.
Of these, you know, like Lando Calrissian is like, I gamble. See ya, you know, like, yeah.
His ship is literally called the Lady Luck, and that's his characterization. Yeah, so that's really interesting, because you may well be onto something here. That so Zahn was told by Lucasfilm, you can't kill anybody, right? So no major character can die. He was told a bunch of other stuff too. So the reason that it takes place after Return of the Jedi rather than before A New Hope is because Lucas said that nothing before A New Hope was viable for the books, because he might want to do that. So yeah, he's bounded in already. But the danger of, you're right, depicting these characters in any kind of alive way is that people would object to it. So maybe by making them pretty flat, you can project your memories of Harrison Ford or Carrie Fisher or whatever else onto them. I struggle to do that now, but I obviously didn't when I was reading them as a kid. So maybe that did work. Maybe what I'm experiencing now as a problem was actually part of the success. Because Zahn's Hugo-winning novella, Cascade Point, is a first-person narrative. So it's not that he's not interested in character. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, you know, we're not talking incredible characterization here, but it's a first-person narrative. So you do get inside the guy's head. That's not on show here. And you're right. Maybe that is a feature rather than a bug.
Yeah, strangely enough. I don't know. It made me wonder. I haven't read a ton of other tie-in stuff, but I started wondering if this might be kind of a problem generally. I don't know, though. And just like that when we... Again, like when you think of a character who has a very specific character, right? Obviously, the Star Wars characters, you know, Trek's an easy one to point to, right? Like Kirk and Spock have like this really well-defined character. We all know about it. But I think it's easy to forget how much of that is the particulars of the performance, and not saying that like it requires the greatest actor to ever bring it alive. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that when you have a line written on the page that doesn't say very much, it's just a line of dialogue, how that actual flesh and blood human actor chooses to say that imbues that with a lot. And so here, even though reading this now, like, these didn't strike me, like, I think the Han struck me the most, just because Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher, like the two characters who are kind of like, or the two actors, I should say, who bring a lot of personality to the roles, right? I can imagine Harrison Ford selling these lines. If you handed him that and $200 million, he would, right? Like, he would pull it off, right? And he would kind of seem like surly and like he didn't really want to be there. Unfortunately, that's the character, so it lines up. But when you're looking for stuff just in the text, it's not there.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I think the other tie-in that I mentioned we might look at was Diane Carey's Ghost Ship, which was the first TNG novelization. And we'd have had a similar conversation because that book was written before a single episode of TNG had aired. So all Carey had was the show Bible that described who these characters were supposed to be. But in every example, in particular sort of the Geordie example, because LeVar Burton did such a lot with Geordie, or certainly with Patrick Stewart, who just transforms Picard. I mean, Ghost Ship does not read like an episode of TV. It just doesn't, because the characters are completely different than what they became.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think you're right. That is a natural danger with a tie-in. And perhaps, yeah, as we say, the kind of characterless aspect is deliberate.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of why the catchphrases they're in there so much, because you can hear every single member of the Star Wars cast say, I've got a bad feeling about this, because they've all said it, so
Sure.
you have it in your brain, and that helps.
Why does the novel choose, it does do some quite radical things. So it kills Obi-Wan off. Right. In the first chapter where we get Luke back, which is chapter 2, it starts with this really strange conversation where Obi-Wan goes, "I must go now," and he just says, "Oh, I've got to go. I can't do it, I can't stay as a blue ghost anymore. I've got to go." And Luke's like, "Oh, well, that's a shame," and that's it. Obi-Wan now. Why does it do that? If it's so interested in being the same as the films, why get rid of Obi-Wan? It does other stuff as well. It finds an explanation, and this is one of its most interesting things. It finds an explanation for why the Empire fell apart so quickly at the end of Return of the Jedi, which is always nonsense, right? The Emperor dies and then everything falls apart. Well, the reason is because Thrawn figures out that the Emperor was using his Force powers to hold the army or the fleet not just together, but to increase their capacity, to make them better, which is a really interesting idea. But it's not in the films. He's introduced it to do something with it. So these novels do have ambition. They're not just seeking to be the same. They make some interesting choices, but there's something about the sandbox that they're in which doesn't let them follow those through.
Yeah, and it even, I think, kind of lampshades that it doesn't know what to do with Luke, right?
Right.
Luke thinks he needs to become, restart the Jedi, become a teacher, do this stuff, but he is very explicit in this. He doesn't know how to do that, and doesn't know what that entails.
And not only that, another thing that Zahn invents is these Salamiri creatures, which is a strange one because they exist on this planet and apparently no one knows about them, but it depowers Luke.
I want to take a break here because I actually want to talk about this. This actually
Let's do this.
Connects into something that interests me a lot. So.
There is something about this book, and I said it in the notes, and the Bantam line in general. It feels like this was a great way for 80s science fiction authors to make money in the 90s.
Yeah, totally.
They're not purely Star Wars books. They are kind of mass market SF with the logo.
No, I mean this is a bigger conversation. I would need to go through the list to revise my memory, but I remember, particularly I think as I got a little older and I was reading them, so later teens, really starting to kind of cotton onto that. Oh, these are writers who have their own things.
Yep.
And some of them are really trying to do the Star Wars thing and just trying to sort of work in that sandbox. And others have their own specialty that they're kind of trying to either apply or just kind of put Star Wars on what they're doing, like a Winamp skin, I remember the
wow, talk about Alda Millennial, because a Winamp skin. Wow.
Kids. Yeah. But yeah, the Black Fleet Crisis, I remember particularly it being much weirder. There's a First Contact thing in there that is much weirder and stranger.
There's the Crystal Star by Vonda McIntyre,
Star.
who's
Yeah, right.
a legitimate science fiction author, right? And a lot of the Bantam fans, I think, didn't enjoy Crystal Star because it was a McIntyre novel that happened to have the Skywalkers in it. Yeah.
it made me think a lot, like reading this. So on the one hand, like, all the complaints I have about it, and we haven't even gone too heavy on it, but I'm like, there's a lot of ways this is bad. There are a lot of ways that it is, and there's a lot of ways it isn't. I don't want to both sides it, though. At the end of the day, I'm probably not going to read this again. But I was just thinking a lot about tie-in novels in like the ecosystem of genre publishing, and like, yeah, the possibility it affords a mid-list author, and like, I don't know, is it better to like waste a year of your writing life putting out popcorn, or is it better to have these places where you can like probably get paid a lot better than you do today to just like churn out a thing with some nice guidelines and like, probably less like stressful to write, and just have fun with it and put out something and get paid for it and people read it? Like, that doesn't seem that bad.
Yeah, I mean, Una McCormack, I immediately think of Una McCormack, who does a lot of kind of Trek novels. I don't think she would see the two in that kind of opposed way. Again, I wouldn't want to speak for tie-in novelists, but I don't think they take a year writing the books. I think that's
fair.
The secret, I think. The thing is, like, Kevin J. Anderson, right? So, who wrote a lot of the Bannon books kind of sort of in the middle period of... Because they lasted for, like, from 91 right up until kind of Phantom Menace, right? So, the whole 90s. Again, I have great memories of Kevin J. Anderson's Star Wars books. But they were different to Timothy Zahn's Star Wars books, which was nice. Although they were tie-in novels, they were still slightly different. I do feel that you were getting introduced to different traditions via this kind of overarching series.
Yeah.
But you're right, I'm not going to read this again.
And there probably is something to it also, like maybe kind of specific to these. I don't know if all tie-ins work this way. Because things like Trek have ongoing series that kind of keep re-grounding it. Things like Who, keep having like kind of keep reconnecting it. But like in this period, right? Like this long period in publishing time between Heir to the Empire and the prequels, you build so much that you get a lot less of that. We need to stay really true to this stuff, right? By the time that like Anderson is writing like the Jedi Academy books, like we're mostly focused on like young teenagers who were not born in this book, really shifting and able to sort of play on their own terms more.
Yeah, and you get novels like I, Jedi, which is just about this character. This has nothing to do with the novels. He just lives in the Star Wars world. And eventually there's I can't even remember, is it the Zahn Vong?
Yes.
Like
they brought Salvatore in. They're like, we need a ringer.
Yeah, you get a completely different galactic war. Like, yeah. Anyway,
that is one thing that. So as I was reflecting on this, I think I read like the first bit of the Yuuzhan Vong, and that's about when I stopped. But a really just kind of rough thing I was thinking about reading this, and it was impacting my reading of it. It goes back to the idea of Star Wars as a political allegory, and again, like there's a lot of Vietnam era stuff in it. There's a lot of the American independence. There's a lot of how America sees itself as acting in World War II. The space battles are a mix of broadside naval battles from the Napoleonic era and like World War II era dogfighting, But as I was reading this, I was thinking about how, that makes sense for George. That makes sense for probably a lot of the people that saw them originally when they came out. And to like try to make this overcomplicated, probably over-villainizing analogy to the state of the Star Wars today, and like, it's owned by Disney. Even before it was owned by Disney, it had sort of become this sprawling, weird corporate powerhouse thing, is that all the war that I have experienced in my life has been when a big, giant, consolidated mega conglomerate of oil companies and weapon manufacturers decide something needs to happen so they can up their profits, which probably means it's time to invade somewhere in the Middle East, right? And that's it. I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, like, you can get into the nitty-gritty of why, the various Iraq wars happened, why the Afghanistan war happened. At the end of the day, that's really all it is. I think, historically, there's not much else to point to. And in these books, specifically in this book, and I was thinking about the other ones I've read in the films, their need to have these massive combats and the casualization of death here is so strange. A weird thing I noticed about this, no stormtrooper ever surrenders or survives anything in here. Ever. Everyone always dies because it doesn't know how to deal with any sort of continued political reality. And thinking about the way that, like, I do not want to bring Abrams into this, but the way that, like, the new films immediately thought, what if the Death Star, but multiple planets at once somehow, and just kill everyone on them, just more death. And just like more death equals more money as like the behind the scenes logic of how the Star Wars films work. And that was getting me down reading this.
So, I couldn't agree more. So there was in the final pages of the novel, there was a paragraph or even a half paragraph which just stopped me short for that. So the novel, as I mentioned earlier, climaxes in a not massive, but battle, which the kind of New Republic sort of win in a limited way, and the final chapter starts with, oh well, we're clearing up the battle site, and how do we do that? Well, Zahn tells us the regular stormtroopers were the easiest. Most of them were dead already, killed when Lando's activation of the mole miners had ruptured the air seals of their stolen ships and left them open to vacuum. And the rest were taken without much trouble. That's just an horrific sentence. It's a horrific image, and yet we just barrel on. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's part of Star Wars. I mean, you know, we can't pretend to be surprised by that. But again, these books did kind of have a choice. There's a moment early on when I was reminded of the Phantom Menace opening crawl, because they talk about, oh yeah, we really need to get interstellar trade kickstarted again. You know, like the taxation of trade routes. That's what we've got to talk about.
Yeah, that's mixed with the summer blockbuster.
But that is the stuff that this book tries, basically bends itself out of shape to avoid, so that we can have pew pew, which of course all Star Wars does. Right.
And another thing, like one of my big notes here to come back to was, you know, you started talking about these Salamari, anti-force salamanders / sloths, salamander sloths, and I have a hard time summing up how much, coming back to this, I dislike that principle, and it's not really as bad as the infamous midichlorian move in the prequels of, like, you know, giving a biological explanation for the Force. But I should acknowledge, this is shaped a little bit by an essay that, do you know Sen Diaz, that does the Dresden Kodak comic?
No.
Okay, just an online webcomic person who I really, really like a lot. But she had an essay ages back about, I think it was called the Harry Potterization of Star Wars, talking about the way that, although it's very, like everything else in the original trilogy, it's gestured at, right? Like, the original trilogy is so good at, like, I'm going to pull on this Kurosawa film, and I'm going to pull on these Westerns, I'm going to pull on a bunch of these ideas and just present them in this, like, fun, engaging way without really, like, anchoring them or giving them depth. Just kind of like, they're just kind of there. But one of the things that they're doing with the Force is this idea of the Force as something actually spiritual. That, like, the reason that Luke wins is not because he's a better fighter. It's not because he's stronger. It's because he's able to stop fighting, right? And like that line of Yoda's, which is like the most ironic in the whole franchise retroactively, that, you know, wars not make one great. And that is the secret of the Force. It's not that you are the chosen one and you are Arthur, you know, that you're just the next in line to something to inherit, but that it's this thing that surrounds us and anyone can tap into and anyone can kind of be more with. You know, it's very Taoist. And I mean, I just think that's genuinely great. And in some ways, I think Star Wars does better when it leans into the wizard side of it for that reason. There's other ways that it tends to go really poorly when they lean into the wizard thing for other reasons. But this book, you know, predating the midichlorians, science fictionalizes the Force in this way that completely takes that away. And of course, like, it depowers Luke, which is like an interesting plot point. But I think even that feels awful because it makes Luke's power magic instead of like something he's dedicated himself to, right?
Yeah.
It becomes kryptonite instead of like, no, actually you train for years and years and years, and like, yeah.
No, I agree. So I think it is about as well done as it could have been, because unlike the midichlorians, like at one point I think someone says, well, how do these Salamiri things work? And the answer is, well, I don't know. Like, no one knows. They're just like, they create a bubble around themselves, and the Force doesn't work in the bubble. And the more of you may have, the bigger the bubble. And that's all we get. So it is kind of still mystical.
Yeah.
But only in the sense that it's underexplained. Because otherwise, the whole thing, it is a bit silly. And I do think it's designed to help explain how Thrawn, the villain that we've said is really interesting and Sherlockian, has a chance. Because he has no force powers. He's not a Jedi. And he has a chance because he can wrap himself in these sloth creatures and everything's okay. But I agree completely with you that what Star Wars has, its big thing still, is that it's when it goes mystical, when it goes mythological, when it tries to be more grounded. And there is one example where we are completely wrong about this.
Yep, so wrong.
Yeah, so wrong. But in general, when it tries to be a bit more standardly science fictional, it does kind of feel less interesting. But of course, then we have Andor, and everything we're talking about is nonsense.
Andor throws everything we're talking about out the window. Although I don't know, to kind of quickly do this, the fact that Andor takes the politics seriously above and all, and the way that the politics are always personal, and that's what it starts with. But in general, you're right. Like when Star Wars goes scientific, when we start talking about how droid brains work, when we start talking about how the hyperspace works, like all that stuff, it starts going off the rails real fast.
And this is why Zahn was an interesting choice. Like, and in a way, like, obviously, it was entirely commercially the right choice. We can't argue with that. 15 million copies. But if they'd have gone with a writer that had that bit more of a cosmic sense, I'd have been interested to see what happened. But instead, he is very interested in formations of Star Destroyers. And there are some interesting science fictional ideas in here. They're not focused on because this is an adventure story. But, I was mocking Lando's new venture earlier because it's too much like Cloud City. But it's very close to a sun. And there are lots of kind of, how do we deal with that proximity to solar energy? And there are some really, interesting sort of just words or sentences that there's a novel in that.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I was thinking of Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire when I read Kim Stanley Robinson's 2312, right, with Terminal.
Right. Yeah.
Right, with like the train going around Mercury. I'm like, yeah, this is a cool idea. Like,
and so, although as a Star Wars novel, the kind of science fiction works against it, sometimes the science fiction that Zahn does inject is some of the most interesting stuff that's going on. It's such a conflicted enterprise, isn't it? The fact that this novel succeeded in being Star Wars for a generation of readers, around the same time, interestingly, that the kind of New Adventures, the Doctor Who Virgin novels, did for 90s Who fans. It kept Who alive more or less over the kind of same contemporaneous period. I don't want to kind of knock that too much.
Yeah, I don't want to totally dustbin it either. Yeah. There's something here about like the age that you read this at, and how to like think about that and preserve that. Because these aren't exclusively for children, but there's a way that they are targeted. Like in a way, they're, to be honest, in the way that like the core Star Wars films, they're not totally for children, but they're kind of just for, it's like grappling with that paradox of their adult things that are also for kids. That paradox is so much a part of science fiction, I think, or at least some strains of science fiction, right? Who's the person said the golden age of science fiction is 12, right? Like,
yeah.
And that's because that always sort of remains true to an extent. And how do you hold on to that and sort of like give these things the credit that they're due, and not say that a 40-year-old who reads these is being childish, right?
Yeah. So I have two thoughts about that. The first is very personal, which is that I read these books and inhaled them. And then some years later, Thrawn comes back in a duology that Zahn wrote, which I think I read in like hardback. I think I read when they came out, or like really soon as I knew that they existed. And I was a bit older, not many years, but just a little bit older. I didn't like them. And I can't tell you whether I just aged out already, or whether that second duology is not as good as this. I can't tell you, but that was my personal experience. So in terms of what's the right age, more or less the age at which I read these, because then I read the sequels and they weren't as good. But the second thing is I was reading this and I was trying to think, are these like, this is just a thriller.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an airport thriller
Mm-hmm.
with, I don't want to say just, it is an airport thriller with kind of Star Wars trappings. It's written that way, it moves that way, it's packaged that way. So yeah, I wonder whether it is, because obviously in the SF space, particularly in recent years, that sort of easy reading experience has been coded as YA. But I wonder if in the 90s it was coded airport thriller.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And that's how you kind of say, well, you know, like, it's not childish to read these books, but they have a kind of effect that is easy for us as SF readers in 2025 to package in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. There's such a tension in the fanish community, the reading community. I mean, I think a tension even in, like, myself, speaking personally, like, between that, you know, reading should be fun and reading should be serious literature, right? Like, and how do you do those? And, like, you want to say that things can do both, and there are books that can do both. But truthfully, like, the books that I think are more on the literary masterpiece side of the spectrum are not books I expect to do well in the airport. You know, I just don't. You know, it's just like, and that's nothing against anyone. It's just I don't think as many people are going to read them as automatically get them. And how do you leave space for that? And I often feel that, like, behind a lot of the brouhahas in genre spaces, you know, whether that's like controversies about awards, you know, flaps and backsnipings about adaptations or, you know, criticism or anything, I think a lot of that is that tension back there. That's really two very, very, very different goals and approaches that are happening, and we're trying to put them right next to each other. I think about that a lot with the awards, where, like, some of the major awards, you know, when you look back over them, I was just doing this recently, it's kind of like, oh, weird, that one? And then the next year, that one? It just, they're so different. And you get these ones that are these kind of, like, feel like these very literary, worthwhile masterpieces that, again, probably not airport thrillers. And then the next year, everyone's just like, no, that airport thriller was the best one. And that's what gets picked.
Yeah, and these things sit side by side with each other, and, you know, that is part of the character of the literature. You know, I mentioned Zahn won a Hugo Award, and in the same year that he won, I think he won a Hugo Award for Cascade Point the year after Return of the Jedi had won the Hugo Award for Best Film. But in his year, Octavia Butler also won an award, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's just how it is. It just feels to me that these books were successful at the thing they set out to do. Like, we cannot say they weren't. They revived Star Wars. A year after this was published, every publisher would have bitten off their arms to publish Star Wars books. Only Bantam wanted to publish this book. It revived Star Wars. It sold huge numbers of copies. It was a New York Times bestseller. Zahn has come back again and again and again to this well. There's so many Thrawn novels now. Thrawn has crossed over into live action. You know, the greatest. He's literally been canonized. So these novels worked, right? They were huge successes. But as I was reading it, I was like, what's in this? I was desperate. I really wanted to find a theme. I really wanted to say, hey, we could talk about, you know, what this book does with this idea. There are no ideas in this book.
Not even bad ideas.
They're on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are a couple of those interesting SF-nal kind of nuggets, but they don't go anywhere. But those two things have to coexist. This was really successful. It did exactly what it intended to do. Readers loved it, and there's nothing in it. It's thin. I don't know what to do with that.
I don't know what to do with that either. Well, goodbye, everyone. Next time on A Meal of Thorns, I'm joined by now. Yeah.
So, you know, Thrawn came in back. One way to think about this, Thrawn came back into, as I said, into Star Wars live action in the Dave Filoni written series Ahsoka. I don't know whether you watched this.
Oh, no.
I did. So Thrawn comes back. Zahn is brought on board the show as a kind of consulting producer to make sure that Thrawn is done well. And Thrawn is exactly as you would imagine he would be from the books. You know, his troops are very loyal to him. He sacrifices people if he needs to, but only in a limited way so that he can succeed later. He looks at art and decides that he knows everything about every individual from their species art. I don't know. But that definitely is a thing. But Ahsoka as a series, I think by general consensus, wasn't good. Just was, so it was very odd structurally. It was kind of attempting to be a live-action sequel to a cartoon series called Rebels.
Oh, that's right,
And you sort of needed to know Rebels to understand Ahsoka, but also even if you didn't, the episodes themselves weren't well structured. They weren't considered pieces of television. They were just entries in a meta-narrative.
Yeah.
And you were either invested in that meta-narrative or you weren't.
That franchise exhaustion, we talked about sort of like not staying on its own, but kind of buttressing things. And like, I picture like, I don't know, entries as kind of like trying to hold up this like ever expanding dome that's getting ever harder to hold up. And then like,
are there trapezoidal sections in that upper
right?
dome, right? Okay, I just wanted to check.
If you're not, it might truncate when you don't want it to. Right? But that is such a weird feature of all of these franchises getting so big in this era of just ludicrous, IP dominance of the media scene. I don't know what else to say about this. I did want to call out one thing that I don't remember or know. Not sure if I care enough to go back and find out more. But one odd little thing in this was jumping out at me on the SF thing as a theme was I'm assuming this is the first place that it starts the convention of calling the non-humans aliens.
Yes,
it might be. I know there were a couple. Right, there was the Alan Dean Foster novel. There's a couple other things before it, but
this was such a good spot. I noticed this too, but then I didn't write it down in the notes. Yes,
yeah.
So there are several occasions where human characters turn to each other and they say, and Zahn as the narrator does it too. But it's interesting that he makes the characters do it too. Oh yes, the aliens don't. Well, what do you mean? Like,
right.
Like the humans are so vastly in the minority in this galaxy. Like the idea. Oh yeah, well we're gonna put together every non-human race as the alien. Mm-hmm. What do you mean? And there's another interesting sort of Terran-centric moment where there's a joke. Luke is talking. I can't remember who to, and he says, "Oh yeah, Lando has introduced me to this crazy drink."
Yes.
Right? And the other character goes, "Oh, that Lando, he's a gambler, so he will know lots of funny cocktails. You must be, woo! What are you drinking?" And he was like, "Oh, yes, it's a strange drink. It's called hot chocolate." And I'm like, no, there is no.
In a galaxy far, far away.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's that whole thing where, like, again, as the film that doesn't have everything fleshed out, you buy it on the visual aesthetic of, things are here, they've been around a while, they've been worn in. But when you do start exploring it, you start realizing, like, these are people. Do they have a planet? Like, what language are they speaking? What's basic? Like, how do these puns work? Like, it has to, like, either ignore all of that or make something new or just sort of, like, problematically port in weird bits of our reality.
Right, and then there's another scene. So inevitably, they go to the Wookiee planet because that's what you do, right? Like, you've got to go to the Wookiee planet because
George didn't have the budget for it. Somebody's got to go there.
Right. Heaven. He eventually did it in Revenge of the Sith, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Star Wars nerds will tell us if we're right about this. I think the Wookiee planet did appear in the Star Wars Holiday Special.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, you're totally right.
Right, and they didn't have the budget to do it.
Star Wars Wiki fans, if you have any hot tips for a Meal of Thorns, please just preemptively block us on social media.
They go to the Wookiee planet because you've got to. Because heaven forfend that you create something new, right? So you just go to the Wookiee planet. And it's Leia that goes to the Wookiee planet, which is a bit like when she did the Ewok thing. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. Anyway, they get to the Wookiee planet, and Leia is dreading it because she's like, I don't really speak Wookiee. I kind of understand Chewbacca, but that's because, you know what I'm going to say. Yep. And I kind of understand Chewbacca because I spent a lot of time with him. I don't know how I'm going to understand any of the other Wookiees because, as is well known from the Star Wars Holiday Special, when they spend minutes just growling at each other, Wookiees don't speak basic. Fortunately, there is a Wookiee with a speech impediment, which means that what they say sounds like English.
The fact that it never clarifies, like, that he, like, speaks basic, right, and then switches back.
All the other Wookiees are like, this poor guy, but he's like, oh well, no, it sounds like basic. What is going on there? What are the, like, to be a bit kind of, I'm laughing about it, but to get serious about it, what is going on there? What are the assumptions underpinning this book? Mm-hmm. That is a thing in this universe.
To take the time to do that and set it up, right? When, like, there are many ways around that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Leia could just understand. There could be one of the presumably millions of other translator droids that are out there could be there. Another character who speaks Wookiee could be there and translate.
And there is something about the novel which is, of course it is. And we've been circling around this. It's small c conservative. It wants to bring everything into quite a tight box, keep things very safe. It doesn't want to rock the boat. And, so it assumes that anyone that isn't human is an alien. It does this weird thing with speech impediments. Nothing ever moves out of a very tight frame, a very specific center of gravity. And it makes the novel hidebound, I guess,
Yeah, right. Well, that's the downside of having a very flat notion of rebellion as kind of like your only politics, right? And
exactly.
Like, of course, what they do is they just make the new republic. They just go back to the old republic. I'm like, do they vote? Are people like, how's this work? Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know what else to say about aliens, so let's. It's so strange. I don't know. You start thinking about the larger project and what it's doing, and I just don't know. And I don't think they know. I don't think Zahn knew. Right? Just like have more adventures, have more stuff happen.
That was the project.
Yeah.
That was the project.
Mm-hmm. And that's, again, that, like, I bring that up. It's like, I find something really profoundly depressing in the sort of, like, necessary serialization of increasing combat as the only way you can conceive of a world as having, like, narrative worth. And it's not that big, like, science fiction and fantasy battles, like, can be super fun and cool and, like, motivating elements for works. But that the series becomes trapped there, right?
Yes.
And I often think that's, right, that's, I think, one of the great stumbling blocks of science fiction franchises generally is not finding a way around that, because it's hard to do with a franchise. You need adventures, right? Like even Star Trek, which is supposedly not about the military, they're all about the military, and they're increasingly militarized, like, as you go through time, right? Like,
absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned, so I mentioned earlier Diane Carey. So apparently Carey was told off after she submitted the Ghost Ship manuscript because her view of Starfleet was too militarized. So even then Star Trek was like, oh, we want to try and avoid that. But you're absolutely right. You go through to Discovery and this Section 31 film that's just been released, it's just war now. And of course in Star Wars, this is one this novel is the first film in the in one notional sequel trilogy. We've got an actual sequel trilogy as well. They both tell fundamentally exactly the same story, which is that the Empire has to come back and the New Republic has to be relatively prepared for it, and then they have to fight. And there is no other story that successive creators in this universe have been able to find. Lucas tried in the prequel trilogy to have a slightly different approach, although obviously with the Clone Wars and everything, it collapsed. But the Phantom Menace and to some extent Revenge of the Sith features a lot of talking in rooms.
Yeah,
and people didn't like that because that's not Star Wars. The clue's in the name.
It's funny that I feel like, and we should probably wrap this up, but one of the places that the expanded Star Wars franchise, I think often, when I think back of the books that I really like the most and like stuck in my mind the most from when I read these, and when I've run into bits of them here and there, are then where they can carve out like smaller stake stuff within that. Like there are all those weird little collections where they would just like go around the Mos Eisley Cantina and just like everyone there would kind of have a little story, right? There were within the larger framework these smaller stories that they didn't all have to be about like a new super weapon. They could just be about like this guy trying to find a weird artifact, and then he finds a weird alien Jedi lady and strange things happen, and like there's a funny droid, like those can be really fun.
Yeah, I mean, you're making me now want to go reread Tales from Jabba's Palace, which is exactly, and there's one, you're right, there's a Mos Eisley Cantina one, and I think there's another one. And yeah, they can be a little bit weird in those short stories, but I mean, there were 60 of these books, and we're saying there were maybe 2 that found a way around it.
Yeah, to dig into the little weird corners and not get into that damned Campbell monomyth. Like, ugh.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we should wrap this up. This has been really fun. It was really interesting to read this so close to reading the Silmarillion and kind of thinking about franchisation of other properties, but like in a very different direction. I think with very similar problems in the larger arc, but I don't know what to say about this. Publishers, give work to mid-list authors. Let them write tie-in stuff. Let them get weird with it.
I agree. And, I think that although we've been pretty sort of down on this book, I think it's important that we do read this stuff and remind ourselves that this is, when you say science fiction, 15 million people think Heir to the Empire.
Dan, great talking to you as always. Thanks for picking this book. This has been a blast. Yeah. Do you have anything you want to share? Anything cool coming up that you want to tell people about?
Yeah, well, you and I are recording right before, but the issue will still be there and relatively new. So the Strange Horizons Criticism Special is imminent, and we have a lot of really good stuff. So we have Tansy Gautam on Lord of the Rings. You're talking about Silmarillion. But we have lots of stuff, and there's a real kind of post-colonial theme that comes out, so we may get away from some of the assumptions in this book. So yeah, Strange Horizons Criticism Specialist, the 27th of January issue. Go and read it.
Cool. Oh, that's fantastic. That's good to hear. Gautam's writing for Strange Horizons. That's very fun. Listeners, if you are not aware of Going Rogue, the podcast, it's really, really good. And they have the funniest and least painful way to approach the Star Wars Holiday Special, which is to listen to their episode rather than attempting to watch the Star Wars Holiday Special. So,
fully endorsed. Fully endorsed.
Yeah. Dan, thank you so much. Have a good one.
Pleasure. Thanks, Casella.
A Meal of Thorns is a podcast from the Ancillary Review of Books, an online magazine founded to address the radical possibilities of criticism with a focus on speculative fiction, world literature, and utopian impulses. Go to ancillaryreviewofbooks.org for regular reviews, essays, interviews, and more. Our opening poem is by Bartra Hari, translated by John Bruff. Our music is by Giselle Gabriel Garcia. Our artwork is by Rob Patterson at The Ratio Farm. If you'd like to support the podcast and the Ancillary Review of Books, that is very cool of you. Go to patreon.com/ancillary review to become a backer. If you buy books through our show notes, we get a cut. Leaving a rating or a comment on whatever platform you listen on would be most appreciated. Questions, suggestions, notes about things we got wrong, drop us an email at mealofthorns@gmail.com. You can also find us on Blue Sky. Next time on A Meal of Thorns, I'm joined by critic and writer Archita Mitra to discuss Joe Walton's novel, among others. Coming after that, we are talking about Hope Merlee's Blood in the Mist with fantasy scholar Marita Arvaniti. There's more on the way. If you'd like to read ahead, please check out our website. Until then, read well, take care out there. I'm going to do a bonus for Patreon subscribers. It's just all the ums and likes I cut out of the episode. 20 minutes of soothing ASMR.